I stood in that stuffy community center auditorium, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry bees overhead, casting sharp shadows across rows of folding chairs packed with my neighbors. Everyone had that same fake polite smile they wore to every HOA meeting. But today, all eyes were locked on me, Elena Morales, and the mountain of violations the board had dumped on my doorstep. Barbara Kensington, everyone called her Barb, the queen of Willow Creek Estates, sat at the head table in her signature pastel cardigan and pearls, looking every bit the concerned community pillar. Her blonde hair was sprayed into submission, and that smile of hers could cut glass. For the good of the neighborhood. Dear, she always cooed, right before slapping another fine on your mailbox. Beside her sat Margaret Holloway, the vice president, clutching her designer notebook like it was the Bible, and Brittany, the treasurer, who kept touching her hair and giggling softly every time Barb mentioned my tacky front door color. My house, the one I designed and paid for with 15 years of blood, sweat, and interior design clients, was apparently a blight on their perfect beige paradise. Barb cleared her throat with that practiced little cough. MS. Morales, do you have any final evidence before we vote on the lien? This was it. The moment I'd waited 6 months for. My hands didn't shake as I reached into my purse and pulled out one small folded piece of paper. It looked so innocent, just plain white with black ink, but it held the power to burn their whole empire down. Barb leaned forward, her eyes narrowing in that condescending way she reserved for people like me. Brittany stifled another giggle. Margaret's knuckles went white on her pen. The whole room held its breath except for the air conditioner humming like it was in on the joke. Barb's lawyer, some slick guy the board paid with our dues, started to object, but the county arbitrator, Judge Hawkins, raised one tired hand. She'd seen enough suburban wars to know when something smelled rotten. What exactly is this? MS. Morales? She asked as I walked forward, heels clicking on the linoleum like tiny victory marches. Evidence. Your Honor, I said, voice steady as steel. Evidence that changes everything. Judge Hawkins unfolded it slowly. At first her face stayed neutral. She'd heard every excuse in the book. Then her eyebrows shot up. The corner of her mouth twitched. The room went dead silent. Barb's smile froze mid-smile. Brittany stopped giggling. Margaret actually gasped like she'd swallowed her own pearls. Judge Hawkins read it twice, then did something none of us expected. She burst out laughing, real, belly-deep laughter that bounced off the cinder block walls. Unbelievable, she chuckled, wiping her eyes. Smart woman. The words landed like a grenade. Barb went sheet white, all that fake concern draining away until she looked like a cheap mannequin. Brittany's mouth flapped open and closed. Margaret clutched her chest. Your Honor, Barb's lawyer sputtered. What on earth? But Judge Hawkins was still looking at me with something close to admiration. 6 months earlier, life in Willow Creek Estates had seemed almost bearable. I'd lived there 15 years, paid my dues on time, kept my lawn at the exact approved height, and ran my interior design business from a quiet home office. Sure, the rules were ridiculous. Who gets fined for hanging an American flag 2 inches too high? But I smiled through it. Barb would wave from her golf cart during inspections, calling out keeping us beautiful. Elena, with that sugar voice. I actually believed she meant it. Then came a Tuesday that cracked everything open. I was in my driveway unloading fabric samples when Barb's golf cart rolled up, Margaret riding shotgun like a loyal sidekick. Elena, darling, Barb said, clipboard in hand. We have a tiny issue with your front door. That terracotta is simply not in the approved palette. I laughed it off. My door had been that color since I bought the house years before the new bylaws. It was grandfathered. Barb, check the records. She smiled wider. Oh, we did. New amendments apply to everyone now. $300. Payable by Friday. I paid it. Then came the next one. My garden gnomes, harmless little things clients loved, were tacky and unapproved. Another 500. My Christmas lights stayed up 2 days past the deadline. 700. My car parked half an inch over the invisible line. 900. The fines piled up like snow in a blizzard I never saw coming. Neighbors started whispering. Elena's letting the standards slip, someone muttered at the block party. Barb would pat my shoulder at meetings. We're all in this together. Dear, for the community. I stayed quiet, smiled, paid, watched. One evening I came home early from client meeting and heard voices from Barb's open window next door. She was on speakerphone with Margaret, and someone else, sounded like her son David, the real estate developer always sniffing around empty lots. The Morales house is perfect, Barb was saying, voice dripping honey. Her creative style gives us the perfect excuse. Stack the violations, lien the property, force a quick sale. David's buyer is ready. Cash offer at half market. We skim the difference. Pay off those little discrepancies in the dues account. Margaret laughed. And once it's gone, the neighborhood finally belongs to people who understand standards. My blood turned to ice. They weren't enforcing rules. They were manufacturing them. Forged violation photos, backdated amendments, embezzled HOA fees funneled to community improvements that somehow always ended up in Barb's pocket. My dream home, the one I poured every dime into, was just another asset on their spreadsheet. I stood there in my own driveway, feeling like a stranger in my own life. But crying wouldn't fix it, so I called my brother Carlos that night. I need your help, I whispered. I think the HO is trying to steal my house. Carlos, the private investigator who'd never trusted suburban smiles, didn't even hesitate. Come to the office tomorrow. And Elena, don't let Barb know you're onto her. The next morning, I kissed my coffee mug goodbye and drove to Carlos's strip mall office like nothing was wrong. Barb waved from her porch as I passed, calling have a blessed day. Dear, I waved back, smiling the same fake smile she'd taught the whole neighborhood. Inside, I was already planning how to make her choke on it. Carlos listened without interrupting while I spilled everything. The fines, the overheard call, the way Barb's community first speeches suddenly sounded like a sales pitch for my own eviction. He took notes in his messy scrawl, then leaned back. First, we check if those new bylaws were even legal, if they forged signatures or rigged the vote. Every fine is fraud. He made calls while I sat in his waiting room, staring at old missing pet posters, wondering how I'd become the neighborhood cautionary tale. 3 hours later, he came back grim-faced. No proper record of the amendment vote. And get this, your original purchase docs show your property was grandfathered under the old covenants. They never updated the county filing. Barb's either incompetent or crooked. He slid a folder across the desk. I need you to get into their board office, that spare room in Barb's basement where they keep the files. Think you can find the spare key. That night, I played the perfect neighbor again. Barb hosted her monthly welcome coffee in her perfectly beige living room. I brought homemade cookies, approved recipe, of course, and listened while she droned on about preserving our values. David was there, flashing that developer grin. Brittany hanging on his arm like a trophy. Elena, your little business must be so stressful, Barb cooed. All that creativity must be hard to keep it appropriate. Everyone chuckled. I smiled right back. Oh, I manage. After everyone left, I lingered to help clean up, while Barb was distracted on a call. I slipped into the basement office. The spare key was exactly where Carlos guessed, taped under the printer tray. The filing cabinet labeled Enforcement Confidential was a gold mine. Stacks of my violation notices with Photoshop timestamps. Backdated bylaws with signatures that looked suspiciously like Barb's handwriting practice. And the worst, a spreadsheet showing $180,000 in HOA dues quietly redirected to consulting fees for David's company. At the bottom, A handwritten note from Margaret. Once Morales is gone, the lot can finally go to the right buyer. She never belonged here anyway. I photographed everything with my phone. Hand steady now. Then put it all back exactly as I found it. Back home, I stared at the ceiling while the neighborhood slept. These people who preached family values and neighborly love have been planning to bankrupt me for years. My colorful door? Just the excuse they needed to label me the outsider. But I wasn't the trusting new resident anymore. I was the woman who'd built a business from nothing, survived client disasters, and now refused to be their next victim. The next weeks were pure acting. Every morning, I waved at Barb's golf cart. Every evening, I paid another fine with a cheerful check. Inside, Carlos was digging deeper. He found offshore accounts, kickback emails between Barb and contractors, even texts where David bragged about flipping the Morales eyesore for triple once we forced the sale. Brittany added heart emojis. Can't wait to redecorate that tacky place properly. Beige everything. One night, Carlos met me at a coffee shop across town. We need a trap, he said, sliding a folder over. You're going to offer the board a huge community beautification grant from a fake wealthy donor, Patricia Chun. $5 million for neighborhood upgrades. But it has to go through your design firm. Barb won't be able to resist skimming it. I raised an eyebrow. And if she tries to steal the project? Carlos grinned. We record every greedy word. I spent days prepping fake proposals, stunning renderings of upgraded parks, community centers, all with my signature style. Carlos hired an actress for Patricia Chun and rented a fancy hotel suite. I casually mentioned it at the next board meeting. A donor wants to invest millions through my firm. Of course. I'd love the board's input. Barb's eyes lit up like Christmas lights. She'd find anyone else for keeping up too long. How generous. Elena, we should discuss this privately. The meeting with Patricia was set for the following week. I played nervous homeowner perfectly. Barb offered to help facilitate the deal. David volunteered his development expertise. Brittany kept texting under the table. I smiled through it all, knowing tiny cameras were rolling. The day of the trap arrived bright and sunny, just like every perfect HOA day. I drove to the hotel in my non-compliant car, heart pounding but mind clear. Patricia Chun, flawless actress in cream silk, greeted me warmly. We discussed designs while I waited for the board to drop by for support. They did, right on cue. Barb swept in like she owned the place. Elena, darling, let me take over the financials. You're so creative, but these big donors need sophistication. David jumped in. My company can manage the construction side. Elena's ideas are cute, but clients at this level want proven partners. Brittany nodded. And we can adjust the aesthetic to something more appropriate. The words stung exactly as they were meant to. But every insult, every plan to cut me out and pocket the grant, was being recorded in crystal clear audio. Barb even leaned in and whispered to Patricia, between us, Elena's been difficult. Those fines are necessary for standards. Once this project goes through my oversight, the neighborhood will finally look right. I sat there pretending to be crushed, but inside I was already picturing Barb's face when the tape played in court. They thought I was the weak link. They had no idea the quiet woman they'd been fining into oblivion had just handed them the rope to hang themselves. I drove home that afternoon with the recordings burning a hole in my phone. Carlos called while I was still on the highway. How'd it go? They took the bait hook, line, and sinker, I said. Barb basically offered to launder the grant money through David's company and rebrand my entire neighborhood beige. He laughed low. We got embezzlement, conspiracy, forgery, enough to bury them. But Elena, the texts we pulled from Brittany's phone mentioned life insurance policies on problem residents. They weren't just forcing a sale. They were planning accidents if liens didn't work fast enough. My hands tightened on the wheel. These people who smiled at block parties and posted "Love thy neighbor" signs had discussed ending me for a bigger backyard. I pulled into my driveway, the one they wanted to seize, and sat there until the rage settled into cold determination. That night, I cooked Barb's favorite lemon bars. Ironic, I know, and took them over just because. She accepted with that syrupy smile. You're such a trooper, Elena, paying all those fines without complaint. The community appreciates your cooperation. David was there again. Brittany perched on the arm of his chair. We're so excited about the Chung grant, he said. With proper management, it could really elevate things. I nodded sweetly. I'm stepping back to let the board handle the big picture. You all understand the standards better than I ever could. Barb's eyes gleamed. Wise decision. Dear, we'll make sure the money is used efficiently. I left them celebrating, knowing every word was already saved on Carlos's secure drive. The next morning, I went through the motions, paid another bogus fine online, waved at the golf cart patrol, even complimented Barb's new approved flower beds. Inside, I was building the case that would end a reign. Carlos kept feeding me updates, forged signatures on every amendment since 2022, HOA dues funneled to David's luxury car fund, kickbacks from contractors who donated to Barb's re-election campaign. Then came a text that froze my blood. Brittany to David. Mom says we move on the insurance angle if the lien stalls. Elena's policy is already in place, quietly. The same policy I'd never signed, just like the fake prenup in the original nightmare. They weren't content with taking my house. They wanted me gone permanently. I met Carlos at the coffee shop again. We end this tonight, he said. He'd already looped in the county fraud unit. Detectives would be waiting outside my house. But first we give Barb one last chance to hang herself. I invited the whole board over for a thank you dinner, steak, wine, the works. Barb arrived in her best cardigan, Margaret clutching her pearls, David and Brittany practically salivating. Over dessert, I dropped the act. I found some interesting documents in your basement office. Barb, the ones with my forged signature on the liens. The one showing where the grant money was really going. Barb's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Elena, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. I stood up slowly. No misunderstanding. The police outside would love to hear your explanation. The knock came right on cue. Barb's face went the color of her pastel cardigan. David tried to bolt out the back. Brittany started crying about just following orders. Margaret actually clutched her chest like a bad soap opera. The detectives read them their rights while I watched from my porch, the same porch they tried to take. Barb stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You were supposed to roll over, she hissed as the cuffs clicked. I smiled the first real smile in months. You taught me the rules. Barb, I just play them better. The arrest made the local news, quietly. Of course. HOA president questioned in fraud scheme. Neighbors who'd whispered about my tacky door suddenly couldn't look me in the eye. But I wasn't done. The real showdown would come at the official arbitration hearing where the board tried to enforce the $25,000 in accumulated fines and the lien. 3 weeks later, we were back in that same community center. Barb sat at the head table in an orange jumpsuit now, her pearls confiscated as evidence. Her lawyer looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The room was packed. I walked in carrying the same small folded paper. Judge Hawkins called the session to order. MS. Morales, you have final evidence. I handed it over. She read it once, twice, then started laughing exactly like before. Smart woman, she said, shaking her head. The paper contained one simple sentence in my handwriting. My property was purchased and recorded before the 2022 bylaws, and I never consented to any amendments allowing liens or seizures. The election vote was rigged with forged ballots. It was so basic, but it destroyed everything. Barb's entire case rested on those illegal amendments. Without them, every fine was invalid. The lien was void. The embezzled money had to be repaid. And the county now had enough evidence to press full criminal charges. Barb tried to speak, but Judge Hawkins cut her off. In 30 years, I've seen a lot of power trips, but rarely one this petty and this stupid. She slammed the gavel. All fines dismissed. Lien vacated. MS. Morales keeps her home, her business, and full restitution from the HOA Treasury. Barb's face crumpled. Brittany sobbed. David looked like he might faint. Margaret just stared at the floor. As they led Barb out, she passed my chair. "This isn't over," she whispered. I leaned in close so only she could hear. "Actually, Barb, it is. And the neighborhood finally belongs to people who deserve it. People who don't steal from their neighbors." The gavel came down and the room exploded in whispers. Neighbors who'd avoided me for months suddenly wanted to shake my hand. "We had no idea," one woman murmured. "Barb always seemed so proper." I just smiled. Proper people don't forge documents and plot insurance scams over lemon bars. Outside, the sunshine felt different, cleaner. My house, my terracotta door and all, stood proud under the blue sky. No more golf cart patrols slowing down to glare. Carlos hugged me hard. "You did it, sis. Not just for you, for every homeowner they tried to bully." But the real satisfaction came in the weeks that followed. The county froze the HOA accounts. Every penny Barb and her crew had skimmed started flowing back. David's development deals collapsed when the fraud investigation went public. Brittany took a plea deal and moved out of state. Her appropriate wardrobe packed in cheap suitcases. Margaret tried one last desperate letter claiming she was just following orders, but the judge wasn't buying it. I redecorated my living room, not because anyone demanded it, but because I wanted to. Bright colors, personal touches, the kind of home that made Barb's beige nightmares look like a hospital waiting room. Clients started calling again. Word of the HOA warrior spread faster than any violation notice ever had. My business tripled. One Sunday, Carlos came over for barbecue on my newly approved, by the new interim board, patio. "You know what the funniest part is?" he said. "Flipping burgers. Barb's still in county lockup, writing letters to the newspaper about judicial overreach. She genuinely thinks she's the victim." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my wine. The woman who'd spent 15 years terrorizing the neighborhood with clipboard and smile, now reduced to complaining from a cell. The new HOA president, an actual normal guy named Mike, called a town hall to apologize. "We're rewriting every rule," he promised. No more weaponized fines. No more secret amendments. The crowd cheered. I sat in the front row and didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My one folded paper had done all the talking. Months later, I was in my kitchen, the same one where I'd first overheard Barb's plot, sipping coffee and reviewing plans for my biggest client yet, a real community center, funded properly this time. No fake donors, no hidden kickbacks, just honest work. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, probably Barb using someone else's phone from jail. "You think you won? The neighborhood will remember." I blocked it and smiled at my terracotta door, glowing in the morning light. Let them remember. Let them whisper. Because the woman they tried to erase had turned their own rules against them and come out stronger, richer, and freer than ever. The house that supposedly never belonged was finally, truly mine. And the HOA that once ruled by fear now tiptoed around the woman who'd taught them what real standards look like. Justice doesn't always come with handcuffs and gavels. But when it does, it tastes sweeter than any lemon bar Barb ever pretended to enjoy. I stepped outside, flag waving exactly 2 inches higher than before, just because I could. The neighborhood looked the same on the surface. Perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, Sunday quiet. But underneath, something had changed. People were a little less afraid to be themselves. A little less willing to let one smiling tyrant decide what community meant. And somewhere in a county cell, Barb was learning the hardest lesson of all. The quiet ones who smile back, They're the ones who burn empires down with a single piece of paper. I raise my coffee mug to the sky. Here's the standards. Barb. The real ones. The wind carried my laugh across the cul-de-sac. And for the first time in 15 years, the neighborhood felt like home. 6 months after the hearing, life in Willow Creek Estates had settled into a new rhythm, one without the constant dread of Barb's golf cart creeping past at dusk. The interim board had torn up every ridiculous rule she'd invented. No more fines for garden gnomes. No more color police at your front door. People actually started painting their shutters fun colors and hanging flags whenever they damn well pleased. The neighborhood looked alive. I was in my office reviewing new client proposals when the doorbell rang. Mike, the new president, stood there with a bottle of wine and an awkward smile. Elena, the board wanted to thank you officially. Without you, we'd still be under Barb's thumb. I invited him in. We sat on the patio, the one David had once called an eyesore, and talked like normal neighbors. No clipboard, no threats, just two people who'd watched the same nightmare end. Barb's trial starts next month, he said quietly. Embezzlement, forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud. David and Brittany flipped on her for lighter sentences. Margaret still claiming she was misled. I took a sip of wine. Funny how the people who screamed loudest about community standards were the ones robbing the community blind. Mike chuckled. You know the best part? The county used the restitution money to fix every single thing Barb skimmed for herself. New park equipment. Real community events. Not just her fancy wine tastings. That evening I hosted a small barbecue for the neighbors who'd finally stopped avoiding eye contact. Carlos brought his famous ribs. Kids ran through the yard without worrying about approved play structures. Someone even joked about putting up a statue of my folded paper in the community center. I laughed until my sides hurt. Later, alone on the porch, I pulled out that same piece of paper one last time. The simple sentence that had ended a 15-year reign of terror. It wasn't magic. It was truth. The kind of truth Barb and her crew had spent years burying under bylaws and smiles. My phone buzzed, another new client. A young couple moving in down the street wanted me to help design their home. We heard what you did, the wife wrote. We want a house that feels like ours. Not like Barb's catalog. I typed back instantly. I'd be honored. Because that was the real victory. Not just keeping my own home, but making sure the next family didn't have to fight the same war. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. HOAs never are. But it was honest now. People spoke up. They questioned the rules. And the quiet woman who once paid fines with a smile had become the reason they felt safe to do it. Somewhere in a holding cell, Barb was probably still writing angry letters about judicial activism and people who don't belong. I hope she kept writing. Every page was proof that the woman who'd tried to erase me had instead created the strongest voice in the entire subdivision. I folded the paper one final time and tucked it into my desk drawer. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon against bullies isn't anger or money or even lawyers. It's patience, evidence, and the courage to hand one simple truth to the right person at the right moment. The sun set over Willow Creek Estates, painting my terracotta door in warm gold. The flag waved proudly. The lawn was exactly the height I wanted. And for the first time in years, I breathed easy. The HOA Karen who tried to steal my home had learned the hardest lesson of all. Never underestimate the quiet homeowner who smiles back. Because when she finally speaks, entire empires fall. And the neighborhood she tried to control ends up freer and brighter than she could ever imagine. I raise my glass to the darkening sky. Cheers, Barb. Here's the standards, the ones that actually matter. The wind carried my laugh across the cul-de-sac. And somewhere, I swear I heard the faint echo of Judge Hawkins still chuckling. Justice served. House saved. Karen exposed. And me? I was exactly where I belonged, home.